Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. This is Football at 4.
Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. It's brought to you by Caesars Entertainment Group of Atlantic City. Come experience the ultimate sports destinations all season long. Wild Wild West, Tropicana, Harrah's Resort, Atlantic City. Book your game day experience right now at Caesars.com. I'm Mike Gill. This is the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN. Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast set to join us here in just a second. We've had a lot of good football conversation, quarterbacks. Howie Roseman's come up a bunch today. The text messages continuing to pour in. The video messages have been coming in all day long. 609-403 0973 609-403 0973. You can keep your text messages coming in over there. There's Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast, which dropped this morning. You can check that out. They talk a lot about Jalen Hurts, which we've done a lot in the 3 o'clock hour. Geoff Mosher, good afternoon, my friend.
How are you feeling today, Mike?
It's very up and down. I mean, I was cold, I was hot. I feel like I'm losing my voice. I think that's apparent.
Yes, that is apparent. You sound a little hoarse, a little bit hoarse. Now, is your back hurting?
Not necessarily, no.
Okay.
Why?
Yeah, I feel like listening to you today, you're kind of carrying the weight of the Eagles and Howie Roseman on your back.
I got you.
Can I just say one thing really quickly?
Yeah, sure.
Because I've been listening to you and I see your Twitter account. Love what you do. You're great. I'm not saying that just so I can diss you, by the way. I'm just pointing something out here.
I feel like here comes the butt.
Yeah, like have you ever seen, this is old, but did you ever see the episode of Crossfire? Remember the old show Crossfire where Tucker Carlson would represent the right and some guy, Chris something, represented the left, and they would fight over whatever political argument was going on? I don't watch that show either.
I'm not familiar.
It's a very old show. The only time I've seen it is a great video clip on YouTube of Jon Stewart appearing on the show.
Okay.
As kind of they thought he was going to be funny and comedian. And what he does on the show, Mike, is brilliant. He looks at both guys and says, "Would you guys please stop? You are hurting America with what you're doing." And they're like, "What? What are you talking about?" And he's like, "You're just so hyper partisan and you're not even having productive dialogue." And
well, that's what I'm trying to do. That's what I'm trying to do.
I feel like you think you're being objective, but you're just gone. The fans that you're addressing are Fox News and you're NBC. Like, I don't think you're seeing the middle ground the way you like to normally think you are. I just heard the draft talk you were having a couple hours ago about they missed on Marcus Smith, but who else was there? It's like there wasn't a lot of people there. And I'm like, I know Bradley Roby and Jimmy Ward are like still playing in the NFL right now. They've both been to Super Bowls. One was a starter on the Super Bowl Broncos. Like, come on. And your comment, I remember being like, they're like, well, I mean.
No. Those are, I said Marcus Smith, a bad miss. But the tweet that I brought up was the guy said they haven't been able to get an impact defensive player in 10 years. Those guys aren't impact defensive players. They're solid players, but they're very much.
If you're a starter on a Super Bowl team that either wins or loses like Jimmy Ward's did, I think you're an impact player. I mean, you don't have to be a Pro Bowl player to be an impact player. All right, well, then that means that
Derek Barnett's an impact player.
He was. He helped them win a Super Bowl. I don't think Derek Barnett is a bad pick. He just has not been what everybody.
No, but that's what I said. I said Barnett is not what you envision. Like, you want the best of the best when you take a guy. But I can't, as much as I don't like Barnett, objectively, he's been a starting player on a playoff team for 4 or 5 years. I can't say that they missed on him. He's just not as impactful as you would like. The tweet that I'm referring to was that they have not got a defensive impact player in Roseman's entire time. And my point was, Jimmy Ward would be a starting player, but you're not building your defense around him.
Well, but when you're picking in the bottom of the first round, you're really only looking for a starter. So to pick Marcus Smith over, there are several guys
totally
in
horrible.
that draft. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
I'm not disagreeing with that.
I just felt you were a little dismissive of like, none of these guys really would have been any better. Like, no, that's not true.
No. What I was saying, none of those guys would have been the impactful player that the gentleman who tweeted at me suggests. How could you draft for 10 years and not one time get a defensive impactful player? And I said, over that 10-year span that he has drafted, keep in mind, they drafted Fletcher Cox, who was a Pro Bowl player.
That is definitely an impactful player. Correct.
Right, exactly. And then they took Lane Johnson, who was an impactful player, but on the offensive side of the ball.
Right.
They had the number 2 pick and took Wentz, which led them to not having a pick later on down the road. So I said, you got to look at the context of, okay, they haven't drafted an impactful player. Fair. But what was available to them when they were picking, you don't always have a chance to get an impactful player when it's your turn to pick. That was my point.
That's fair. In that case, in that year they did. They just didn't take one. I mean, they took a really – and the biggest issue with that is that, all right, take Jalen Reagor, for example. Okay. He has not been a good pick, and it doesn't look good, right? But if you would have asked, like, 30 personnel people going into the draft, should Jalen Reagor be drafted somewhere late first round? Is that too much of a reach? They'll tell you, no, he's late first, early second, because by the time you get to the bottom of the first, most teams don't have 32 first-round picks. They've got like 15 or 16. So after you get through the first 18, like you could literally justify taking anybody in your top 50 at that point if they fit your culture and scheme.
Yeah.
So that was the pick itself made sense as far as the talent toward the value. Whereas Marcus Smith, our homework was like third round pick at best, fourth.
That adds
kind of like
to
the JJ Arcega-Whiteside thing, where very few people had him as a second round pick.
Yeah, the Smith adds to it is that he was not a projected first round player at all, and you take him over guys who were available that would have been starting players for you, presumably.
Right. Like at very least trade down or trade back or something, or trade up because that draft was wealthier at the top 12 to 14, I believe.
Like I was talking earlier, that the team has been in the playoffs however many times, only 4 teams more. They won more playoff games. What role does Roseman have in the success of this long-term success that this franchise has? Like, do we minimize it? I was pretty shocked.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was pretty shocked. Rube tweeted these out that there's only 3 teams, I think, that have more playoff wins since Lurie has owned the team. Now,
yes, but Howie Roseman has not been the GM, obviously, since Lurie owned the team. That's more of you have to look at the last 10 years for Howie, right, than the entire – if you're talking about who deserves credit.
Right. That's another part of this is like, he was the GM, but he wasn't in charge of personnel because Andy was here and Andy was making the picks, and then they kind of crossed over for a little bit. And then the murkiness of when Chip got here, and there's a lot of unknown of what he was the GM, but he really wasn't running the draft for a while there, right?
Yeah, because Andy was executive vice president of football operations, so he technically had the final say. I kind of tend to look at the Howie Roseman era beginning with Chip Kelly's first year, and then up until now. But then you take away Chip Kelly's third year, because then he was not even GM, right? He was just, in charge of the medical department or whatever that wonderful press release was. So that's how I would normally look at it. What about the year,
and Andy's last year? They kind of had that big press conference where Jeffrey was like, we used to go off of this draft board, and Howie had his own draft board, but we went off of this one, but now we're going to kind of go more off of Howie's draft board. Remember that whole situation?
I do. So that would be what, 2011 or 2012?
11, 12, somewhere in that range, when they said,
I remember that.
Andy's been running the draft, and we've been going off of his board, but Howie has his own board. And now
because at the time they were trying to reduce, they had a couple of drafts. And they were trying to kind of take the responsibility away from Andy. It's really hard. I mean, again, you should never judge a GM by one specific pick or one specific draft, but it is hard, and that's why I kind of like to keep it from 2000 and Chip Kelly's first year, 2013 till now, and then just eliminate 2015 because he wasn't in charge at that point. If you want to throw 12 and 13 in there, I mean, that's fine. It can be part of the conversation. It's probably not going to sway you one way or another. There were some good picks
the problem is you go all the way back to 12, which was Fletcher Cox. People are kind of that draft has lost the shine of. If you're saying, hey, I made some good picks in 2012, the people would say, well, that was 2012. What have you done for me lately? The problem is, I feel like, and I was talking about this earlier, you got to give anybody who gets hired as a GM, I think in today's world, you got to give them almost 5 years to put their thing together to see how these players play out. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? And so I think that Roseman had some.
Real quick. Yeah. Real quick. I think we shouldn't count 2012 because now that I look, that's the year they drafted Nick Foles. And that Andy Reid said, look, we didn't get Russell Wilson. We're taking Nick Foles here. Right. Andy, his power and his clout was still so great that if Andy said, I bang my hand on the table, I'm picking that guy. And of course they had Washburn that year. So that was like collectively, we need a guy who fits our wide nine, and Fletcher did. So, again, I really think it's for Howie's sake, you probably start with the beginning of the Chip Kelly. Okay. But go ahead, you were saying.
Well, so I feel like they had some – now, they make the trade for Wentz, okay? And that affected a lot of their drafts because they only ended up with 5 picks in the 2 draft classes following. They had 10 picks over 2 years, one of which they had no first-round pick and no third-round pick. Correct. I think they really, after the Super Bowl, not having the picks in those classes, I think hurt their roster the last couple of seasons.
Yes.
And then they came out and said, look, we felt like we were close, so we did a couple things we normally wouldn't do.
Right.
They kind of went off character because they felt like we were right there to win another Super Bowl.
Do you accept that as a rationale, as I understand that, or do you think that abandoning your character is a bad idea when sticking to a certain principle got you to where you are?
It's a fair question.
That's all I'm trying to do. I think bring both sides of the argument.
I agree. I think if the organization as a whole comes together and say, look, we're right there. We just won a Super Bowl. Or, do we have another window? Do we just go for it? I don't have a problem with that. That's what I'm saying. It might have been the wrong decision, but I don't have a problem with saying we think we're right there. Let's go for it. Is that fair?
But I say that if you're wrong with your decision, you should be judged for it because I think the best organizations say we know how to build a team. We stick to our principles. We don't overreact one way or the other.
100%. But I would also say if we all come together and make that decision and we wrong, it should not also be a fireable offense.
That's fine. That's fine.
You know what I'm saying?
You're right. As an organizational decision, of course. Absolutely.
Right. Like the organization, Jeffrey Lurie could have said, no. You know, let's keep the course that we've done for 20 years and go down that road. I think they all collectively, Doug included, right, said, we're right there. Let's go for it. Let's go get Deshaun Jackson. Let's go bring Jason Pete. Let's go for this one more time.
Yeah. I mean, look, Doug has – so it's hard because Doug has lately said in interviews that he wishes he was more outspoken at times, and he wishes that he had not been afraid to – or not afraid. I don't think he said afraid, but he just wishes he had expressed his opinion. I know he said in his latest – I forget where it was. It made a lot of headlines. But he said if in his next job that he takes – that's going to be important to him to make sure it's all collaborative and not just said to be collaborative. And that part of it is a big part of sort of what makes the Eagles in that they tend to build up and then have fantastic collapses because of the collaboration issues that we have seen over different generations there.
Yeah. And then another thing that I mentioned is like, it's not like you get 4 drafts a year. You get 1 draft. You might not do a good job in that particular draft, which, I mean, you know, but then like in 2018, they've done a really good job. 4 out of their 5 picks have all been starting players. Goddard, Sweat, Maddox, Mailata.
Sure.
So does that get judged
heavier? I do say, you know, starting players for what? For a 9-7 team or a Super Bowl contender? No, I'm not trying to downplay. These are good players. You're right. They're good players. But
I think Goddard and Mailata and Maddox probably start on just about every team. Sweat too.
Certainly, Goddard and Mailata are going to start for most teams. Probably Sweat, although he might be situational. Either way, they're playing for most teams. There's no doubt about it. But I do hear that often about, 11 of these starters came from the draft. I'm like, well, all right. Well, over the last two years, you got 13 wins. So, I mean, what are we talking about here? But go ahead.
So obviously, it's just weird to me. This is my point, I guess, is it's weird to me that a team that has had so much success. Now, the level of success, they won the Super Bowl 4 years ago. Now, if you expected them to win the Super Bowl every year after that, then I can understand being disappointed. They made the playoffs 3 out of 4 times. Now, what's playoffs? 9 and 7. Okay, that's disappointing. The fact, though, that they are this consistent, I think, is, to me, very odd that a team that has this much consistency, Kevin Colbert in Pittsburgh, they've never had a losing season in the whole time they're out there. I don't think anybody's ever calling for Kevin Colbert to be fired, right?
Well, no, but like you said, it's not just that they're making the playoffs. I mean, most years, give or take, and like this year is an exception, most years they're Super Bowl contenders. There's a difference between making the playoffs and being a legit Super Bowl contender. And now even more so that the 7th seed has been put in. But Mike, to your point, to counter it a little bit, and I was surprised, I did this research the other day just because I was curious, right? How many teams since 2018 to now, how many teams in the NFC do you think have made the playoffs?
Have made the playoff field since when?
Yeah, since 2018 to now.
I mean, of the how many of the
16 NFC teams? Yeah.
8.
12.
12 of the 16 teams have made the playoffs since 2018.
Right. And so not all of them, as we know, have been Super Bowl contenders. The Bears made it last year. The Vikings made it last year, won a game. Washington made it last year. So my point is, to make the playoffs, especially now with the 7th seed, it's not a sign that you're that much better than the rest of the league. I would say now, I think playoff wins and are you a legit Super Bowl contender should probably be the measuring stick. And again, a lot of this year, Mike, for fans, right, is all about what your expectation was for this team after winning the Super Bowl. When you win the Super Bowl because you drafted a quarterback really high in the first round and you experienced that success, even though he didn't win the game, but then you sign that guy to a long contract, you expect to be a Super Bowl contender for a decent amount of time. You want to be like the Packers with Aaron or Big Ben to the Steelers or Russell Wilson with the Seahawks. And 3 years later, you were rock bottom. Like you bottomed out. And that was not just a happenstance thing. That happened because of a lot of things that went on with the coaching staff, the front office, ownership that don't happen in 31 cities. You know what I'm saying? So if you're,
how many cities?
I don't hurt the fan.
How many cities?
I was just saying.
Go ahead.
Like, while I do think fans, as you're mentioning, can tend to be weird, give nobody the credit they deserve. I think that they feel like, why are we in a rebuilding? It's great that we made the playoffs in a rebuilding year. Why are we rebuilding again 3 years after we thought we had a franchise quarterback and a franchise trending in the direction of being competitive for the Super Bowl every year? They really haven't. 2018, they were certainly competitive as Super Bowl contenders. They were not in 2019, certainly not in 2020, and not this year. Right. And who knows about next year?
Yeah, it was odd because they have the 4th most playoff wins in Lurie's tenure, which I was kind of surprised by because the teams in front of them were the Patriots, Brady,
right,
Green Bay, Favre, then Rodgers, and the Colts, who had Manning, then Luck. The Eagles haven't been afforded that situation where they've had this quarterback situation in a 25-year span where you're like, I can see why. They just had this constant stability. They had a tremendous run with McNabb, obviously, so that shows how big that is. But the whole Wentz situation, I think, has really, really bottomed out last year. But for them to be where they are now and then set up to kind of take off, I feel like they really got themselves out of disarray. People are like, well, he got out of this mess. Well, he created the mess. Well, yeah, things happen. You make mistakes. I feel like everybody wants perfection. That's all.
Well, I definitely agree with you with that. I think there's like two types of people thinking on this. There's I can't control. I'm a fan of the team. I work for a living. I don't have time to get into all the drama and stuff. I just want to see a good football, right? And so I can easily move past whatever happened in the past and just enjoy the moment and hope that they're leading up. And then I think there's the older fan who's kind of been around and seen a lot of crap happen throughout the years and say, am I just being set up for like the nice honeymoon phase here so that in 3 years, this front office or coaching staff or whatever dysfunction happens is just going to tear it all apart again? And I think that's just as fair to think that way because the history has shown you it's been that way. I mean, all of the success, the playoff wins, right? Yes, there's the Super Bowl season, but that long extended period of time was really Andy Reid era. And as you see, he's doing that now in Kansas City, and the Eagles are up, down, up, down. Yes, they won their Super Bowl.
Yeah.
3 years later, 4 wins. You're not seeing that in Kansas City.
Right. And other than the Patriots, there are a handful, 2 or 3 franchises that have 2 Super Bowl wins, but most over the last 20, 25 years have 1. So it's not like you're so far off the pace car here with your one and being the point of, okay, but your point is valid. You made the playoffs, but are you a true Super Bowl contender? That's a fair comment. But most, like I was saying earlier, would you trade 3 picks if Aaron Rodgers says, I want to go to Philly? I love what they're doing there. They have this great offensive line. They got a great young receiver. I want to be there. Okay, we want 3 picks. I said, you're trading 3 first-round picks for Aaron Rodgers. He's had 17 chances to win a Super Bowl, and he's only won 1.
Mm-hmm.
He might only play for you for 2 more years. He's had a 17-year window. He's won 1. You might only get a 2-year window. He better win 1 in that 2 years. Otherwise, you just gave up 3 picks. You know, that's like just getting Aaron Rodgers. He's won 1 Super Bowl in 17 years. Are you giving up 3 picks to get him?
I am. I really am. Because the funny thing is, Mike, there's such a vast difference between the quarterbacks who've won 1, like Aaron, and then multiple. Like, who's won 2? Big Ben's won 2. Eli's not playing anymore. He won 2. I'm just trying to think of like now, like obviously Tom Brady. There's not that many. So if you won 2, you're pretty elite and you're pretty happy about that. The Ravens have 2 rings in like 20 years, and they're considered one of the best franchises ever, right? So we're having this discussion right now. Right. We're having this discussion right now as if Aaron Rodgers may not win the Super Bowl this year. Like, I think right now he's probably the odds-on favorite to do it. So if he does that just change the argument where a month from now we're having, oh, yeah, you give the 3 because he just won the Super Bowl? No, he's the same guy. He's going to lift your franchise up and give you a chance to win the Super Bowl, which is all you can ask for.
Now, do you think Hurts could be this generation's Wilson?
Well, I think he's a little further behind as a passer than Wilson coming out of college. I mean, I think he needs more development. Russell was a great passer at Wisconsin. And Russell threw with great anticipation and timing pretty early in his career, knowing that he doesn't have the strongest arm. You know, I think Kaepernick might be maybe the more interesting conversation. I don't remember the first days of Kaepernick because I'm just getting old and what he was like as a passer. But I do remember him rushing for 200 and passing for 200 against the Packers, right? In Green Bay, I think it was, in a championship game. So, See, that wasn't Aaron Rodgers' fault. But no, so I don't know. I think he's got an opportunity, if developed correctly and given some time, to perhaps become that kind of quarterback.
You're right. And I'm not saying he has to be Russell Wilson or better. I'm just saying the whole Russell Wilson blueprint is that you got this guy. They got him in the 3rd round. They didn't have to pay him. And he was on that rookie deal. They built the whole team around him. And they won that Super Bowl because they didn't have to pay the quarterback. And then, of course, once they had to pay Wilson, they had to break the damn team up.
Yeah. Well, that's the NFL, and that's why, the cream rises to the top with quarterbacks. I would say it's not Russell Wilson's fault that Seattle hasn't been back to the Super Bowl, even though this year he's had not a great year, but they've really missed on a lot of picks. And they were really known for making a lot of picks in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th round. Well, while they were building up, the Shermans, the Cam Chancellors of the world, the Michael Bennett's of the world, the Cliff Avrils. They made really good decisions in draft and free agency that they haven't been able to do.
And John Schneider is regarded as a good GM.
He is a good GM, yeah.
But he missed on some guys.
Oh, well, all GMs miss on guys, you know. Again, judging any individual draft or draft pick is bad. Did the GM put a Super Bowl caliber contender on the field for a season? You know, that's how you judge a guy if the expectation is to win a Super Bowl.
This is a good conversation, Geoff Mosher.
Yeah, it is good. I enjoy it.
Yeah,
and again, I'm the biggest conversation that is not being had is what if the Eagles fired Howie Roseman, right? Well, look at the two people who Jeffrey Lurie has entrusted to run his franchise since he bought the team. Joe Banner, Howie Roseman, right? Anybody who thinks that Jeffrey Lurie is going out and hiring like John Lynch or Chris Ballard, I don't know. You know, like the guy who came up more through the football guy sector. Yep. I know you make fun of that, and you're right to do that. Like you're just not seeing the bigger picture here. You know, he's probably going to hire someone in the mold of a Howie or a Joe Banner type anyway.
And look, does Roseman miss? Absolutely. Does he have egregious misses? They're ones we pointed out. Rieger, egregious to me. That's an egregious miss now, hindsight. Marcus Smith, just an egregious selection. You could have thrown a dart and found a better guy than that. But some of the other things that he does really well, I don't know that you're just bringing in any guy and he's going to do those things well. So he might draft better, but you might be in cap hell. You might have all sorts of cap issues. So you got to yin and yang this thing.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you could bring in a guy who doesn't invest in the offensive and defensive lines the way Howie does. And, that's been his biggest strength. I think that's actually been a bigger strength than the salary cap manipulation because, to be honest, it's really not hard these days to be well under the cap. Almost 80% of the league is. So I don't think – and he's got guys who are doing contracts now underneath him where that's not only his sole focus. So I think that his constant drafting of offensive linemen, signing of offensive linemen and defensive linemen at a time where you might not think they need one. Like a lot of people were like, what are you drafting Landon Dickerson for? You need a corner. You need a safety, right? Probably me saying safety, but that makes sense. And look how important Landon Dickerson has been. And I think
it's also the Hurts pick a couple of years ago when I remember we were going back and forth when Broads was doing the show with me and he hated the pick. And I said, look, they just value the backup quarterback more than they do a safety.
Yeah, and I feel that's where I would disagree with them. But, either way, their investment in key areas like quarterback, like I disagree with that. But, I mean, obviously going to get Minshew, people had an issue with that, thinking that was threatening Jalen Hurts. And I'm like, are people crazy? You want a good backup. You learned the value of a backup who's cheap. And you didn't have to use a second-round pick on him, just a sixth. So, so I think he does those things really well as well. I know there's this whole top 5 argument going on. I mean, who cares?
Well, there was honestly. Some guy had him number 5 yesterday. I think this is where this all started.
Yeah, well, either way, the point is, I think a great discussion is this 7th seed now and how you view the success. Like, is Matt Nagy a successful coach? Do you think Matt Nagy is a good NFL coach or a successful NFL coach?
I don't think it's. I mean, the quarterbacks that he's had has not been fair to judge him.
Okay, that's fine. But, right. I mean, you have to judge him either way. But I think most people would say, no, he has not been a good NFL coach.
I thought he handled this whole quarterback situation poorly.
Sure, but he's been to the playoffs twice in 4 years.
And the first year that he was there.
But 2 years ago.
The first year that he was there, they thought he was like this genius guy. I mean, they were way better than they were supposed to be.
Right. But they made the playoffs last year as a 7th seed, whereas 2 years ago, that wouldn't have been a playoff spot. So you'd be saying the guy has made the playoffs once in his life, and it was because they had a great defense. Vic Fangio was the man. He's been terrible. Their offense has been terrible, and you would look at it totally differently, I think. I think you don't, though, because most people think Matt Nagy's not a good coach. Yeah. But if you talk about the Eagles' success, they're going to be in the playoffs second time in 3 years or 3 out of 4. But
4 out of 5.
Obviously, I'm saying since the Super Bowl because I'm talking about the trajectory of the team. They have not won a playoff game, though, since 2018. And most people thought they were going to be consistently a playoff Super Bowl caliber team.
Geoff Mosher, Inside the Birds podcast. This was a really extended version of Football at 4. It was good, though. We had a lot of fun.
Love it.
Good back and forth. Tomorrow, Andrew's here. Adam's back on Friday, and we will look at the Eagles and the Cowboys, which is kind of a meaningless feel to this Dallas week here, and then playoff football when Mosher's back. We'll know who the Birds will be playing. Geoff, have a great rest of your day, man.
Mike, it's been a pleasure as always.